Everyone, please make some noise in the chat for Kacen Callender and Rebecca Kim Wells.
Thank you so much, Bonnie.
Yay! Oh, now I feel excited even more. So hello, good morning. I remember reading and loving your first book, Hurricane Child, so I was so excited to talk to you about Larkin Kasim Start, A Revolution. Could you tell us a little bit more about what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, so the first spark of inspiration came from the response to Felix Ever After. So there was like a lot of overwhelming love for Felix Ever After, but I did notice that Felix's character, whenever he made mistakes, he wasn't given as much space to learn and grow from those mistakes. And I realized that the more marginalized you are, the less space you are given in real life and as a character before you're deemed as unlikable. So that really sparked a lot of reflection on my own life and how I had recognized this unconsciously, I think, from a young age. And in order to stay safe, really just wanted to be like a people pleaser and didn't want to get in trouble for anything. And so that's basically Lark's character. They are very conscious of how they will be perceived as a person with multiple intersecting identities. They're Black, queer, neurodivergent, non-binary. And they know that they're not given that same space. So they really want to be as likable as possible.
I really saw that when I was reading it. And I thought you did this so well as the story moves forward, how one bad decision sort of starts, a kind of a little domino chain of worse decisions. And yet at every single turning point, I'm like, like, I understand why you're doing this. And I'm just like, no, like, take care of yourself. Yeah, but I thought that was such a good character arc for them, because you can really see how human Lark is and how it's totally understandable what they're doing and why they're doing it.
Thank you. Yeah, it was, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just, just gonna move on, but please respond.
I feel like it was fun, like craft-wise too, because I don't know how you like to work with your character arcs, but for me, it's important that a character actually does make mistakes at the beginning, and that's how they get to the end where they're able to like kind of learn the lesson or the theme, and then become like they grow as a character, they grow as a person. So it was kind of interesting to start from the perspective of this character who just wants to be as likable as possible. So it was almost like a backwards effect where they're making mistakes, but they're really just trying to get the reader and the people around them to like them.
I find that so challenging. I'm very much like, I sort of have a story in my head and I want the characters to move through the story the way that I want them to, and that's not always the right way. So one of Lark's key struggles is trying to understand the impact that their social media usage has on their life, both on and offline. You've written compellingly about social media, accountability, shame, and self-love, both in Larkin Kasim and elsewhere. How did you decide to explore these ideas in a book?
How did I decide? I think that it was just especially when I was more active on social media a few years ago, like during the pandemic, towards the start of the pandemic, I should say, I just realized how messy social media is in terms of like feeling like you have to be on there as an author, but then how there's a lot of toxic behavior on there, and how to this day there are still authors who are kind of like picked to be the punching bag of the season, I feel like, where people are kind of like looking for excuses to say that they are like problematic, so we are able to bully them. I feel like the latest example, someone was accused of pretending to be a woman of color, and she is a woman of color, and that was not great. They were really just looking for an excuse to tear her down and tear her writing down for fun. So I feel like that is happening, but social media has also been, it's like a double-sided coin where social media has been so important for progress and for change and for demanding accountability for mistakes like systemic mistakes. So I feel like it's been so important for all of that, but people are kind of almost like trying to use that as an excuse to have toxic behaviors and actions. So it's just all so convoluted. And so I think I spent a lot of time thinking about, well, it is so important to be able to use social media for accountability. But at the same time, there is a difference between accountability and bullying. And then at the same time, people who are being requested to take accountability often accuse people of bullying. So that's like such a twisted, messy, place to get into, like conversation to get into and think about. But for me, it became important to be able to say, well, what is it that the person did and what can those accountable steps be in order to differentiate between someone who was being accused of pretending to be a woman of color, for example, when she isn't, she can't do anything to be held accountable for that. So therefore, that's just shaming and bullying, versus someone has made like a mistake against another group of people, has like stereotyped another group of people. That's something you can take accountable action for. So that was a very long-winded answer, but I just was thinking, it was towards the beginning of the pandemic. There was nothing else to do but think, really, because we were in quarantine. So I think that, and I was writing Larkin Kasim at the same time. So I think that just kind of all flooded into the book.
Well, I think, it is such a complicated and messy experience, because you're so right. There are many ways in which social media is an engine for good change, and then so many ways in which it can just become very unhealthy for everybody involved. One of the scenes I really enjoyed was toward the end of the book, when the Lark, they've been having a lot of conversations over the course of the book about like, oh, I'm being accused of all these things. Am I a bad person? Like, what do I do about this? I don't want to be a bad person. And they eventually sort of come to this place of like, look, if you feel I've done something wrong, then tell me what you think I've done wrong, and I can sit with that and try to make amends if I agree with you. But otherwise, like, you can't just bully me just for being who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that they were able to get to that place.
Thank you. Yeah.
So Lark and Kasim are, the two titular characters, and they are best friends, and then they're not, and then there maybe are again, and maybe more.
Mm-hmm.
And, but it's only because they make the choice not to give up on each other, on this relationship that they have, even through a lot of miscommunication and disagreement. Lark, as you were saying, is someone who always wants to be seen as being a good person, is a people pleaser, doesn't want to make waves. And Kasim is much more unapologetic and, just not necessarily confrontational, but less willing to go along to get along. And so I'd love to hear, what do you think makes their relationship work when they're such different people and they have so many like conflicting perspectives?
Yeah, I like the way that you put it. It's that they don't want to give up on each other, and they don't want to give up on the relationship. And for me, it was really important to sit them down and have them learn how to communicate, because I don't feel like when I was a teenager, I really saw a lot of examples of what healthy communication can look like. Sometimes we just kind of skip over that part where it goes from like enemies to lovers. It's like the two is like a split second. It's not really like what difficult conversation look like when someone is saying, you really hurt me, and that person has to be like, okay, what accountable steps can I take in order to make this work again? So I think there are like a lot of in-depth like emotional communication scenes between them that felt really important, and I really enjoyed writing.
I love that, especially like as a teenager, you have so many big emotions. And I remember when I was a teenager, there was a fight with my best friend at the time, and I didn't really understand what was going on. And it was a big kind of blow up. And then because I too am kind of a non-confrontational person, I was just like, okay, if you say you don't want to be friends anymore, I guess. And then we just, basically never talked to each other again. And I feel like, it's so great that, the characters in this book are modeling like, look, if you really care about each other, like try to talk it out, try to see what's, where each other is coming from and what's really going on. That's something that I wish I had had a better handle on when I was younger.
That's something I wish I had a better handle on even now. To this
You're so right. So there are several people in Lark's community, but a unique one is Birdie, who is the main character in the book that Lark is writing. I thought this was such a cool writing device to have in this story. I'd love to hear about how Birdie came to be not just a character that Lark made up, but also kind of a commentator and sounding board for them over the course of the book.
Yeah, Birdie really. So there was like originally a completely different draft of Larkin Kasim that really went into, it started like at the beginning of 2020, and Larkin, all the characters did not know what was to come for the year. Like in the first scene, there was like an announcement of this mysterious virus that was happening. So I think that original draft felt very like claustrophobic because it was like about the pandemic. It was about being kind of like in quarantine. And I had to rewrite the book and find the book's voice. And I think when I was finding the book's voice, I leaned in a lot more to Lark's neurodivergent mind. And then that's where like Birdie kind of like popped out of nowhere. And I really enjoyed their character for sure, because it kind of played on the idea of like, we authors do have the characters that we tend to think about and have like conversations with. I don't know if, well, I should ask you, do you have conversations with your characters?
Sometimes, not like Lark does, but sometimes, yeah.
I feel like when I'm having writer's block, I'll like pop the character down in the room with me and just have like a conversation, be like, why aren't you working? Like, what's going on? Tell me what's wrong with the story. Sometimes they give me the answer. But so yeah, I think that Birdie was kind of like born out of like the slingshot away from the claustrophobic original first draft into kind of like this really free, like creative ADHD brain.
I think they're great. Birdie popped up on the very first page and I was like, who is this? Because nobody else in the scene is acknowledging this person. And it's cleared up within a couple of pages, I think within the first 15 pages or so, who Birdie is. But for that time, I was like, who is this? Like, what am I missing? What's going on? It was a fun little like detective, hunt to have, like piecing, like going back and forth and being like, did I miss something? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, that's like a common reaction. And my editor did also suggest like I explain like immediately who Birdie was, and I can understand like if I was a reader, I'd be like, is like just like why is this so confusing? But I also felt like from Lark's perspective, they wouldn't be like, Birdie, who is my main character in my book and who I sometimes think about as if they're a real person.
Well, I think, you did it perfectly, because I totally trust you as a writer. So I was like, okay, like, I'm sure that there's a reason that I don't know exactly who this is right from the beginning, and I will trust you. And it was actually explained very early on. So, it wasn't like I had to read the whole book and then go back and hunt for clues.
Right.
Yeah. So, as we're just discussing, Lark is a writer. They want to be an author and they're writing a book. And this sort of feeds into a lot of, their actions over the course of the book. They're sort of trying to be popular online because they think it's going to help them, get a book deal. And so they also spend a lot of time thinking about, writing and the ways in which authors interact with the public, especially online. At one point, they say that after seeing Goodreads reviews criticizing characters for making mistakes, they resolved to write only perfect characters who cannot be criticized. Oh my gosh, my heart hurt reading that, because that hyper awareness of potential criticism is definitely familiar to me. I really loved the journey that Lark takes as a writer over the course of the book and the way that it plays out alongside their journey as a human. I'd love to hear more about how you went about crafting Lark's writer side and the challenges that they face in their quest for publication.
Sure. Yeah, I think that I had like a good time breaking the fourth wall throughout the book. So Lark, as you just said, was like very hyper aware of what it means to be a likable character, and at times is kind of like questioning, like, what if I was a character in a book? Like, what is? So I really kind of wanted to make that parallel of like, what does it mean to be a likable character in a story, and who gets to be a likable character in a story, and as I was saying, like this was all very inspired from Felix's reaction to Felix and realizing that marginalized characters don't get to have that same space to make mistakes and grow before they're seen as unlikable. So Lark's journey as a writer is basically them kind of like realize, it's very much so like on the parallel line of like, what does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to be a good character also? Yeah, breaking the fourth wall was interesting. I wasn't really planning on doing that, but it kind of like happened throughout the book in a really fun way.
Well, there are also, Lark is querying this novel that they have only written part of, which is, you shouldn't do that, first of all.
I did that. My first novel.
I actually did that too. So it worked out for us, but it's not going to work out for anyone else.
Yeah.
But there are also in the book query responses that they get. They send these letters to agents asking if they're interested in reading the book, and then these agents respond. And some of those were just brutal. Oh my gosh. Some of them had like good moments, good points, but then followed them up with like, it was like a good shot, and then the chaser was like really terrible microaggression. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that must be so difficult and demoralizing. And I just was sad for Lark, because I was like, you're such a wonderful budding teen writer, and you should be like encouraged and supported.
I agree.
Even if you're not like quite there yet in terms of professional capability, which why would you be? You're a teenager. Yeah.
With those reviews, those were the real reviews that I've received in the past. So I wanted so all of those microaggression moments, yeah, like those were like, that was also kind of like breaking the fourth wall moment to show like, this is why characters like Lark and their stories are seen as unlikable, because it is so steeped in those moments of microaggressions where it's like, for example, someone saying like, this book is not Black enough. This is like, yeah, those were unfortunately the reviews, except for one review. The review that wasn't real was there are too many characters using they them pronouns, and I popped that in there because I knew someone was going to say that about this book. So
absolutely. I read that and I was like, yes, this is a meta commentary on the book that it is in. Yeah. Do you have a favorite supporting character?
My head immediately goes to Jamal, because I think that they are the kind of person that I would really like to be, in terms of like, just hold steady to your truth, no matter like how cold or harsh people around you think it is. Jamal just being very, for the viewers, Jamal basically like sees early on that Lark is lying and is straight up like, why are you lying? We can't be friends if you're lying. Like, I have my own kind of like moral compass, and I need the people around me to be authentic. So yeah, I feel like I am drawn to just kind of like that strength of.
I liked Jamal a lot too. And I sort of thought, they're an interesting character because their commitment to their moral code means drawing some very strong boundaries. And I thought about it and I was like, if I was that close of friends with someone, would I be able to do the same thing? And would I want to, because their response totally valid and I respected it. And I definitely made me appreciate them more as a character.
Mhm.
And then at the same time, I was like, well, if you had a different kind of relationship with a friend, then maybe if they made a mistake, you would tell them and also try to hold them accountable
Mhm.
instead of kind of abandoning them. But I also respect the choice. So, there are no easy right or wrong answers.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I really liked Birdie. But if we have to pick like a real character in the book, then my favorite supporting character would be Sable.
Yeah, she's usually my first answer. So it's interesting Jamal like switched to being my first answer today. But yeah, she is definitely like a great symbol of holding on to authenticity also.
Yeah. In a very loving way.
Mhm.
Were there any parts of the book that were particularly joyful or difficult to write?
For Joyful, that scene where they're in the rain at the park, what is it, the Coven of Femmes, that really felt like a joyful moment that I hadn't really planned. Those are my favorite scenes where it kind of skews away from the outline and the plot that I had planned out and just becomes this kind of like burst of creativity. So it was a lot of fun. I felt like a lot of character development kind of like came out that I wasn't expecting. And for difficulty, I think any scene where Lark is being called out, quote unquote, for something that they did not really do, felt like a moment of PTSD from social media. It was just hard to write about.
It was too real.
Yeah.
I really think so. Every scene, where they say something, online and they're trying to be thoughtful and contemplative and, vulnerable, because it is, vulnerable to put your real authentic opinions out there in many cases. And then all the responses are just taking the most bad faith reading of what they're saying. And I was just like, "Meh."
Yeah.
Oh, I felt so bad for them. Like, yes, Lark is a people pleaser, but they're also just trying to live their life. And as a person, like, we're all people. And like,
Yeah.
give them a break.
Yeah, I do
Yeah.
feel like I've started to just realize that everyone really is just trying their best. The older I get, the more I feel like just people just need more breaks. Unless they are purposely, like clearly going out of their way to be racist or.
Yeah. I really enjoyed Lark's creative writing class. Mr. S gets into a lot of really interesting topics from a writing perspective, really interrogating, asking the students to think deeply about their stories, what they're writing, why they're writing. Is there any advice that you would give to aspiring writers who read Larkin Kasim and get inspired?
Yeah, I think, and as I was writing this, I was realizing for me, the key point of advice that I need to remember is to always follow my joy, like whatever is making me happiest in the moment. Write about it. Don't worry about what it is that I think people are expecting me to write about, or what it is I think will hit the market and take off as like a big book, quote unquote. Just really, so I think that internal joy as a compass will allow a lot more creativity to unlock and allow the story to be the best that it can be.
I struggle with that so much. That's like the number one piece of advice that I need to remember and like have in front of me at all times. Yeah.
Can I ask you what advice that you would give to aspiring writers?
I think along the same vein, I would say I heard when I was an aspiring writer, and it's a very annoying piece of advice to hear when you're aspiring, but it's extremely true. I think that to treasure the time that you have before people are looking over your shoulder, because It's amazing to be published. It's amazing to have your work out there, to have, beautiful covers on your books, to have people reading your books. But, it's like heavy is the head that wears the crown, right? The second that you are agented, are published, you have people looking at your work and judging your work, and not just readers who are reading the book to enjoy it, but also industry people, as Lark experiences in the book, judging the book based on, is it this enough? Is it that enough? Does it fit into the box that I have of the idea of the book that I want it to be, which is not the same thing that you want it to be? Do we think it's marketable enough? Is it a quiet book? Does it deserve the budget? There are so many ways in which books are judged and authors are judged before they even get to a reader's hands. And it's a lot to take, and it can definitely mess with your creative passion and joy. So my piece of advice is treasure the time that you have before other people think that they can judge your work.
Yes. As you were speaking, the anxiety that started to rack through me, I did not even realize how I thought that I had been kind of like taking a lot of time and space away from the industry in that sense, like giving myself some space to heal really from all of that. But I was not expecting. Yeah, because it's so true. The moment, I feel like that is the ultimate creativity killer, is the question of like, how are people going to take this book? And it's before you're published that you have, I feel like there's just so much more access to just continuing to follow your joy instead of having to follow what everyone else thinks, or thinking that you have to follow what everyone else thinks.
Yeah, I'm on a little bit of a publishing break right now, because I had 3 books with my one editor who I really liked, and then she left, which often happens. And I wasn't a good fit with the editor that they paired me with. So I was like, okay, like, let me just like take a break and try just writing something not under contract, just for myself, see how it goes. And that's been such a struggle.
Oh, really? Yeah.
It has, like, just like trying to recapture that joy and trying to write like just for, what amuses me, what I find funny or entertaining or moving, without thinking about, okay, like, is this gonna sell? But am I wasting my time on something that's not gonna make money for me? And all that stuff.
One thing that has really helped me has been going to AO3 and just having fun with AO3, like fan fiction. And I used to write fan fiction when I was a teenager, and I feel like that's where I really found my joy, because you can't sell fan fiction. I've been thinking about trying to get back into fan fiction. Maybe I will one day.
I have deep respect for fan fiction, and I have never read it, but maybe I need to start.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that was cathartic. So toward the end of the book, Lark receives a few pieces of writing advice from a very respectable source, including the following. This person says, figure out what your story is about, your message or your question. It could be anything that you think is important, that you think the world should know. And I'd love to hear from you. We've talked about what Larkin Kasim Start a Revolution is about on the plot level, but what do you hope that readers take away from the story as like the big message?
Big message. I think the big message is that regardless of what mistakes you make, we're all learning human beings, learning, growing human beings, and we're still worthy of respect and love. And accountability is a part of love, self-love, taking accountability. I feel like because you know that you're worthy of that respect, no matter what mistakes you've made. So taking the steps to change whatever, this is like a lot longer than I was expecting it would be. But taking the steps to like make the necessary changes is kind of like an act of self-love rather than steeping in shame for mistakes that you've made.
That's such a good message. And it's so true that when you go online and people are talking in various ways about you, about someone else, it can sometimes feel like your job or what you're supposed to do is just take in all of this gunk and bad feelings. And that's, these people are saying these things to you, and clearly that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to like listen to them and internalize them, but really, like, who does that help, and what positive change does that make? And so I think you make a really great point that people should take under advisement.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Stepping away from Larkin Kasim just a little bit, are there any books or other media you've enjoyed recently that you'd recommend to our audience?
I watched The Sandman. I feel like everyone in the world has watched The Sandman, but I did enjoy it. I really enjoyed how different the format was. I haven't actually spoken to anyone about this before because I'm not really like online with people who have been watching it, but it just felt like such a like every episode was like, not every, but a lot of the episodes were so separate from the ones that it felt like more of like a collection of short stories. It makes me very curious to read the graphic novel. Have you read it before?
Yeah, actually, my middle school librarian, it was a very tiny library, so I read almost everything in there. And then my middle school librarian gave me Sandman, and I read them all. And I was obsessed with them. And then I started passing them around like our friends. And the librarian was like, oh, because I gave them to you because I knew you were ready for them, but other kids might not be ready for that. I loved them when I first read them. And I think the adaptation is such a smart and a fresh and loyal, but has been updated in really thoughtful ways to match, the times. I think it's a really great adaptation. I think I don't know if I would say that reading the graphic novels is essential after watching that adaptation. I think it's that good, and I think it's been updated and modernized in ways that are important, which, with any piece of media that's like 30 years old, of course there's going to be stuff that just is of the times and not really up to today's standards. But I loved it too. I thought it was such an exercise in storytelling from a perspective, not by committee.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we have some Q&A questions to get to, but right before last question, can you share anything about what you're working on next? What can people look forward to?
I am working on a fantasy that hasn't been announced yet. So that's all I can say.
How exciting. Can you say if it's adult or YA?
It is YA, yeah.
YA. Oh, how exciting.
Yeah.
I did, I loved Larkin Kasim, but I missed that sort of element of magic that was in Hurricane Child.
Yeah, I think that my like epic love story, Felix Ever After, and Larkin Kasim are the most contemporary things that I've written, but I think that my heart does tend to like edge a little bit closer to the magic and fantasy. Maybe that's why Birdie came out of nowhere also. Just like another moment of, nah, you need some fantasy in your life.
Birdie's great.
Yeah.
I think you're muted.
Thank you. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. We have a bunch of audience questions, which is really exciting.
Okay.
So first off, we have Connor, who asks, how do you approach writing relationships like what Lark and Kasim had? Was the complexity of their relationship something that you knew when you created the characters, or was it something that you kind of discovered as you started writing this story?
I think it was something I discovered as I was writing, because it first started with the one trope that I do really enjoy, where Kasim was writing about an unrequited love story, and Lark has no idea who it's about, but it's very clearly about Lark. So one of my favorite tropes is the oblivious like main character not realizing someone's in love with them. So it did start there, which is a little bit complicated, but I think as I wrote, I was discovering more about their relationship. Like, why is it that they fell out? Why is it that they were not able to communicate their feelings for each other sooner? So it just became more and more complex as I went.
Amazing. That makes sense. I think I've heard many authors say that their characters often sort of surprise them as the writing journey goes. So it makes sense. We have a question in the chat from someone named C, who says, I am autistic and have ADHD, and I've never felt so represented as I did when I read Larkin Kasim. How do you develop a book where not only there are neurodivergent characters, but the actual writing fits a neurodivergent brain? What was your journey with that?
I felt like it was, first of all, yay, thank you. But I felt like it was almost kind of a like opposite of what I usually do. Usually I'm so focused on what is it that a neurotypical person is going to think about this sentence that has carried on for 30 beats and probably should have like 5 periods someplace in it. And what would someone think about like the 5 pages of thought and like voice? So I feel like it was kind of like a unmasking for me of not really thinking necessarily what it is that a neurotypical person would want, but what is it that's authentic to Lark and what's authentic to me, and letting that come out with and having fun with it.
Absolutely. What a great question too. And thank you for your thoughtful answer. We have an anonymous question that asks or says, self-love is such a huge theme in the book. Can you talk a little bit about the idea of self-love as a revolution?
Yes. I feel like we're in a world that does not accept marginalized identities. The more marginalized you are, the less accepted you are for just existing. So if we're taught from a very young age that cis, white, straight, able-bodied is what is lovable, then it's a revolution to go against that. So to kind of teach yourself from an early age. And to this day, honestly, I'm in my 30s and I'm still having to teach myself against the constant barrage of images and ideas that that one specific person is what is worthy of love, and teaching myself that I'm worthy of love also is revolutionary against what society expects us to think.
Absolutely. It's revolutionary to simply exist unapologetically, I think. And that is such a huge part of self-love. I think somewhat relatedly, there's another audience question that sort of deals with that barrage of negativity, we'll call it. So we have an attendee who asks, in regards to sort of online accountability, do you think the pattern of sort of bullying and bringing folks down using a platform is a trend that will kind of maybe grow out of as an online community, or do you see it as something that's sort of more going to stick around?
I think that it's very connected to how it is that we see ourselves. So it's always a reflection of how, when we're bullying other people because for fun, really, I think it's a reflection of how we're feeling about ourselves. And I think that right now society at large is going through a trend of a lot of people kind of reflecting a lot more about what it is that is unhealed and what it is that we need to, like our shadow selves, and what it is that we need to learn to love about ourselves. So I think that the more that we focus on our inner growth instead of attacking another person for a mistake that they have made or not made for the fun of it, to kind of like distract ourselves from what it is that we dislike about ourselves. I think that the more we heal that, the less that this will happen online. So yeah, I hope that we will outgrow it the more that we all learn to love ourselves a little bit more.
Oh, I just want to say, we didn't talk about this in the discussion, but I love that Birdie comes from a future where they've figured that out. And that a lot of her commentary with Lark is, wow, like you guys are still working on that. Okay. Like, you know, it's going to be okay, but it's going to take some work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's maybe the appeal too of the online sort of dogpiling thing is it's not work, right? So it's the easy shortcut to the actual work of self-love. And so there's something really amazing about what this book teaches us about doing that very important work. Excuse me. We have a couple more questions. So one person asks, I guess speaking of online communities, you both touched a little bit on fanfic, but this person is wondering how it's maybe influenced your writing and your writing life.
Yeah, you know, I think when I was, so there were definitely pros and cons. I think that the one con that I still like have to think a lot about is I started writing fan fiction when I was like maybe 12 or so. I wrote Cardcaptor Sakura and like, yeah, just like a lot of different anime things. And I think because of fan fiction, I learned to really love storytelling about characters who have already existed. And it took me a moment of like teens into 20s to realize my characters on my page, no one knows who they are yet. It's different from writing about a TV series that is already beloved and characters are already known, and you're kind of like borrowing those characters and putting them into your own story, so you don't have to develop them as much. So I think that that's why in like my late 20s to where I am now, I really started to focus in on how do I like story character arcs and how do I really develop a character's growth. So that was the one con. And in my ADHD, I have of course forgotten the original question. Oh, how has it influenced my writing? I think the pro is just like the enjoyment of it, just the I do think that I sometimes have like a tendency to take myself a little bit too seriously in my writing. I think that fan fiction is really all about like the heart and what is that you love and what is fun and what do you enjoy. So I think that that's always a good reminder that I keep in mind.
Absolutely. I love that as a sort of takeaway from fan fiction, because it is ultimately so much about joy and love of a world and a universe.
Yeah.
And I think it's very easy to be, maybe, I imagine, a little bogged down with the details. And so returning to that joy is such a valuable lesson to keep.
Yeah.
And this actually kind of moves nicely into this last question that we have from an attendee, which is, what is your writing process like? Do you wake up every day and do the thing, or do things come to you in bursts? Do you outline? Do you just kind of improvise, figure things out as you go? What's your process?
It is such a flow. I feel like a part of my process is trying to remember that it's going to change with every book. So for some books, it really very strict outline, cannot stray from it. My favorite is when I have a very loose outline of bullet points, just kind of like emotional beats I know I need to hit. And then as I'm writing, a scene I didn't expect like flows in. Sometimes it's just, what is it, pantsing? Like writing from the seat of your, just kind of like writing whatever comes to mind. So that's like it changes from book to book for a specific process like that. But I used to have a schedule where I would wake up and I think it was like 11 a.m. I would write, I would take a break, 2 p.m. I would go back to writing. These days, I feel like I have been really needing a break and just needing to rest, and my body has been rebelling. So I need to just take it easy. And it's been very much so like I feel like I could write. It's been a few weeks, I could write. No, let's like play a video game. And like allowing myself to be okay with that has been difficult, but I think I need it. I think my writing needs it too.
Absolutely. There's that saying that comes to mind. It might just be a tweet that I read once, but it was like, if you don't make a point of taking a break, your body will make that decision for you. And then it will happen at a time when, it's not, the break won't feel as good or be as conveniently sort of timed as if you make the conscious choice. So definitely a valuable lesson. We do have a little bit more time. So very selfishly, I actually have a question for you both that I love to ask our authors. Just as a bookseller, I am always curious, what are you both reading and loving right now? And what's like really bringing you a lot of joy writing wise?
I was going to suggest you go first, Rebecca.
Okay, I can go first. I actually have been really struggling with writing writing. I've been struggling with writing and with reading. I've been struggling with reading because I find it sometimes difficult to read while I'm writing in the same genre. And I've been piling up tons of adult fantasy that I can't read yet because I'm writing adult fantasy. So I will point out one book that I'm very excited to read at some point. I'm excited to read Babel by R.F. Kuang. I've heard great things about it, and I also I've heard that it does some really interesting things craft-wise, and I'm always interested in stuff that pushes the boundaries of what you're doing craft-wise. So I'm excited to read that. I haven't read it yet, though. And then something that I am reading, which is not fantasy, that I am enjoying is the new book by Meryl Wilsner. I'm going to make sure I have the title right. Yes. Mistakes Were Made by Meryl Wilsner, which is a May-December romance rom-com between two women. They meet up, they have like a very hot hookup at a bar, and then the next day they realize that one of them is the mother of the other one's best friend at college. And mistakes were made, and they continue to happen. And I've been listening to that, and that one has been a delight.
I love perfectly chosen titles like that. Yeah, I feel like I am in the same place where my reading really affects my writing. And so because of that, reading recently has felt more like work. And so because of that, video games are being prioritized. But I am, I wouldn't say I'm enjoying it because it's hard work to read these types of books, but I am reading a lot of like nonfiction books about like the body keeps the score and like attachment theory and that sort of thing. So I think that that's what I've been reading these days, and I'm looking forward to being able to break away and actually enjoy like a good fantasy.
Me too. Someday.
Yeah, absolutely. It will happen. I believe in it. I believe in your return to fantasy reading for both of you. But it sounds like you have some good books that you're exploring now as well, which is great. Well, thank you for indulging my selfish bookseller question that I love to ask. And that sort of brings us to the end of our event. I want to thank both of you so much for such a fantastic conversation. It was really, really wonderful to hear you both talk about craft. We did just get a last minute audience question, and I think it's a fun one. So if you will, Kacen, if you're interested in indulging it, someone is wondering what video games you're playing.
Besides like the nightly Sims, I feel like that's just so meditative. Just click, make someone go to school. I've been enjoying like Baldur's Gate 3, though it's been hard to like really get into the game because I know there's going to be another update there. It's not even like finally released, so they continue to update it and release these patches that force you to start the game over again. Oh yeah, so I'm just thinking about all those bosses that I beat, and I'm like, oh god, do I really want to do? So, but yeah, those are the games I'm enjoying right now.
Amazing. I love making someone go to school in The Sims. Amazing. Well, great. Another fun note to end on. But again, just returning, thank you so much to both of you for your amazing conversation, your insight, and for telling us a little bit more about this really, really wonderful book. And thank you to our audience who had really excellent questions, and just was really engaged and excited to be here. We're excited to have you. So thank you for joining us. I do have, my little housekeeping plug at the end. If you haven't already picked up a copy of Larkin Kasim, there's a link that I dropped in the chat, and I will drop it one more time for good measure, where you can order a copy of the book if you so desire. And thank you for supporting, of course, our authors and an independent bookstore. Even if you don't get a book, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here. So yeah, what a really, really lovely conversation. And again, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Kacen, for this amazing conversation. We hope to see you again soon.
Thanks.